Hello and welcome. My name is Mwangala Chakalashi Santos. As always, this is a show we bring to you where we have inspiring, life-changing, and transformative stories, all meant to leave a lasting and positive impact on your lives. Joining me in the studio today is one of my favorites. I like to call him my guru. He's a mindset guru for Mwangala, and I know that is for all of us. We have all been asking the question, and the question is, how do we remain positive in a country that is faced with so many challenges? Now, he's an author, he's written a number of books, he's a TV personality, he's an entrepreneur, and the CEO of Mokat, Mr. Gilbert Banda. Mr. Banda, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you, Mwangala.
It's good to have you on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on your show, actually.
You are my guru. Every time I'm looking up to having or feeling motivated or transformed from the inside, I always look up to you.
Oh, I'm honored. I always remember the first day you came in my office. I was also inspired by your story.
Yeah. So we inspire each other.
We inspire each other, of course.
Hence being
they say
on the
there's
show.
always, positive energy that flows.
Of course.
So I appreciate that you are now doing what you're doing and trying to touch many people out there. At least it's a good platform to be able to impact people with positivity and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, who is Gilbert Banda?
Okay, so Gilbert Banda is, like you introduced me, is an author, is a businessman, is a father, is a husband, he's... in terms of education, I think I've gone up to master's level of education, and I did my primary school in eastern Zambia in a place called Nsadzo Primary School in Chadiza district. I went to secondary school in Lundazi district, where I hail from, apparently. So I spent 5 years in Lundazi, and then I came to University of Zambia, where I did my first degree. And after completing my first degree, I thought I would get a job. But unfortunately for me, I never got a job because that's the time that, the government stopped employing, in spite of having, educated us, giving us a university education. Then they told us there's no job. Go get your own jobs. And that was the day that turned my life around, because I think that is the day that helped me start on a journey to self-improvement and also to find what I'm doing right now. Because I spent 6 months, I remember very well, and I've documented that in my first book, Managing Success, where I really talk about your pathway to success and how to manage that success. I spent 6 months writing application letters to private companies and so forth. I wrote literally everyone. I think I wrote hundreds, and I'm a good writer, I've been a prolific writer. So every day I would wake up, if I see an address, I would write an application there, post it, and after 6 months, when all the responses were coming, oh, sorry, you're too educated, we'll put your letter on file, I made a resolution. I remember writing to the Post newspaper at that time. It was not called the Post, it was Weekly Post at that time. I remember writing a long letter, complaining about, I think that was the last complaint I ever had, because I was always complaining about, look, the government educated, spent so much money, well, now they can't give us jobs. But I resolved then that now I was never, ever going to look for a job. I was going to be my own boss. I was going to make my own employment. And luckily for me, at that time, in the 90s, it was easy to get started, I think. I look back and say, I found it easy to get started, because I began with, because I thought, well, I've got this, education, and I got educated on the backs of poor people. Why don't I go back where I came from and help the people that got me educated, because my education, I thought, would be the key to their development. So I decided to start on my first social enterprise. I started an organization called Mtuzi Development Foundation. Mtuzi meaning shade in our language. So I wanted to provide shade.
For the locals.
For the locals, absolutely, yeah. So that was my start in social enterprise. And I remember starting that organization from scratch, from zero. to a time when that organization became nationwide. I was employing over 50 people in that organization. And that organization, I employed people who were even more qualified than I am. I had PhD holders, master's holders, and at that time I only had my first degree. So I began to look at, the power of ideas, that you can start from an idea and grow it to become an enterprise and be able to help many people. Wow. And at that time, I think I developed a lot of possibility mindset, looking at, say, I could think of anything and I would start and it would just blossom.
What was driving you?
I think what drove me at that time was more necessity, because I thought after having an education, and university education is really like the highest level in Zambia. When you attend that education, you feel that you are very educated, you feel that, the things you have learned, maybe you should be able to practice them. Try to see if what you really, proof of concept, so to say. Yeah. Say, all these concepts we're learning, all these theories, let me try and see which of these theories really work. So I think I was so driven to do that, I kept trying ideas. I did that social enterprise. I did some business ideas, several of them, actually, And I found that, you can literally start from an idea and build something. And for me, that was really exciting, because I think that time was one of my best years of my life, because I just discovered that, as human beings, if you put your mind to something, you can literally do the impossible.
That's so powerful.
Absolutely.
Put your mind to something?
Yeah.
Okay. So were there any failures during that time?
Well, I think when you say failures, I always say, we never ever fail. Yeah. We just stop trying.
Of course.
I look at, there are certain things that I wanted to do in that social enterprise, in the Matuzi Development Foundation. Because I think for me, I was lucky, maybe because I have a good personality. I could go to Europe and I would come back there with thousands of dollars, sometimes in a meeting or sometimes just writing a letter, Also, maybe at that time, I think there was a lot of goodwill from donors, giving money. I think in the 90s, it was not as difficult for people to get money from donors as it is now, because I think now there's donor fatigue and so forth. But when I started in the 90s and so forth, for me, I found it very easy, because like that organization that I started, I think over 10 years, we had gotten in excess of $3 million, which were invested in those communities. And I was still young at that time, vibrant.
Very
absolutely,
Everything was possible for you.
I began to I think in terms of possibility thinking, at that time, I really had no limitations. I would think of, I need to go to Europe. I would just, buy a ticket and take off. I need to go to America and go raise money for this, and I'd come back there with money for those particular projects. And at that time, I think we were more committed to the cause than I see now. People start NGOs now which are more, for helping themselves. But I put my heart and soul in terms of really ensuring that, if we did any investment in the communities, that, the people really saw that investment in there. And we did that. So when you look at, were there any failures? Yes. The failures, I would say, although for me they were learning lessons.
Of course.
The failures were that I began with such huge passion that we need to develop, these rural areas. So we brought in money.
So let me follow you. Passion is what drove you.
Passion, passion drove me, absolutely. But one of the things I discovered is that, when we went into these areas, we created dependency, because as an organization, we're dependent on the donors. The communities we served were dependent on Matuzi Foundation. So each ever project we started, they always said, this is a Matuzi project. They never said it was our project. And yet when we started, we said we're going to, whether we're building clinics, whether we're putting boreholes, they always said this is their project, meaning us. So whenever we came, oh, a director, Abuela, the owner of the project, the Butuzi. But, you know, one of the things which, and I remember classically well, that's where my frustration began to come, was the dependency that, you know, every year we're so preoccupied with, you know, writing reports, writing proposals. So we were highly dependent on outside resource. We never thought about generating our own resource to empower these communities. And these communities were also waiting. Oh, Tiembeke is our director to bring to bring money. And everything literally was so centralized on this organization getting money from there. And in the end, if there was a shortage of money here, everything fell apart there.
So it was like a ripple effect.
Absolutely. And then I saw, you know, certain areas, you know, where I'd put up these storage sheds, where there are these grain banks, where we actually put up the model to them, to these communities. They had helped build those by building, you know, by supplying the bricks, the labor, and so forth. But to operationalize it, because at that time, some of the donors, the time period for which that project existed had expired. Now, they were looking for other projects, but those projects came to zero. My frustration then began, because I began to think, why do we have to, you know, and that time, like I told you, I was passionate, you know, I was living in Lusaka, but, you know, I would be driving to eastern Zambia, I would be driving to Copperbelt province. All the time I was on the move, and that time, you know, with the energy of youth and so forth, driving was really like an adventure. Going to visit these communities was really my finest hour. But, you know, looking at that, you know, you invest so much money and then these projects fall flat on their face became my biggest frustration, because I began to see the dependence we had created. Because these people that we worked with, now instead of really for them to have their own path, they were waiting for us. So whether it was, you know, community projects, whether it was farming and so forth, if we didn't bring fertilizer, then they wouldn't be doing anything. They said, fertilizer. And for me, that was what was killing me slowly, because I said, what sort of development is this which is dependent on us, and us were so highly dependent on outside resource? If this is cut out, what will happen to these communities?
Exactly. It meant it was not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. Actually, that's the right word, sustainability, because we began to see that everything that we touched was never a sustainable venture. We had not really put in mechanisms to make these self-driven. And for me, that frustration drove me to start looking for ways. What is it that, you know, we should be doing? Because I'd spent over 15 years doing that, and I found that, you know, that development paradigm was not working. So I took a trip. And that trip came really because somebody else had, you know, when I was expressing my frustration, said, oh, you should actually, you know, go to Malaysia. In Malaysia, you know, they teach a lot about development, you know, that development really starts with your mindset, it starts with your mind, that, you know, for them there, they call it moral education. And they said, you know, if you can attend one of those sessions, you can come back here. Maybe you can better help these communities. So going to Malaysia was really something that I would say the day that turned my life around, because I think it was that model which, when I came back from there, I was passionate, thinking that, you know, because what I learned there was that, you know, everything starts with the mind, starts with goal setting, starts with vision. And so armed with that information, which is about mind programming and mindset change, coming back, I thought, well, maybe if I should go back to those communities, help them to have this transformational thinking around the projects, it would work. But then I thought, well, we had already, you know, worked with these communities, and what was not working was because it was money from outside. Maybe if I go to these donors, I tell them this is my new software for development, which is on mindset. Can I get money to promote mindset? Yeah. Unfortunately, Mwangala Santosh, no donor was willing to finance me on that.
Why do you think it was like that?
on one hand, I began to have a suspicion that are these people really coming here that we should develop, or they want us to perpetuate this dependency on them?
Exactly, because then they knew that if you understand that it all starts from
absolutely
the mind.
none of them said, no, we wouldn't be promoting. We want more physical things you are doing in the communities there, then we can finance you. This, no. At that time, I was now more frustrated, but I thought, well, I have this model, why don't I test it out? Because I always, like I'm in a naturalist, always trying to experiment. Why don't I experiment with corporates? But that decision alone moved me away completely from community development, because when I was trying to test it on corporates, my idea was that, well, they'll be able to finance it. And they were financing it. So I spent now the rest, I actually handed over that organization to somebody else and began to pursue this, to work with corporate entities, banks, organizations, teaching them about mindset change, about goal setting, helping them to build their teams. And fantastic, working wonderfully well. But it was working because these corporates had the money to pay these. But initially, when I was starting out, I actually just tried to do it for free so that they could be able to see what sort of results. And I remember when I was starting, said, Mr. Banda, just talking, you think that is a business? I said, no, but I think the organizations, the corporations that I speak to, when they see the results, obviously they'll be willing to pay. And that was my journey in starting from Tuzi Development Foundation to an organization that we founded that we were calling the Motivational Center for Africa's Transformation.
I love that. I want you to hold that thought.
Okay.
On the other side, when we come back, we are now going to talk about how motivation can actually get you to where you want to be. And obviously, we're going to ask the questions. The question that is being asked out there, how do you remain motivated in the midst of all the challenges that we're being faced? Don't go away.
To advertise on this program and enjoy amazing introductory rates, please call us on +260 211 290959 or +260 211 290912 or +260 953 538 000, or send us an email at loyolazam@gmail.com.
If you're joining us now, I'm talking to Mr. Gilbert Banda, who was just taking us through his life story, and now we're talking about MOCAT, how that was based. And obviously, we're also going to talk about your book. I know you're an author.
Yeah, sure.
With me is a beautiful book, The Eagle Story. I can't wait to hear the story.
You can't hear that story, yeah, okay. So then that moved me to start that organization, the Motivational Center for Africa's Transformation. And that was really found on the premise that, all the original founders of MOCAT had the same experience as me, having worked with rural communities and seeing that, after pouring in so much resource in those communities, people came out of there frustrated that, nothing much came out of there. And so we actually came together and said, why don't we form an institution, really influenced by my visit to Malaysia because of that moral education, which is really on the peak performance, which is on mind programming. That helped us to start MOCAT. And our original idea was that MOCAT was going to be a center of excellence in each of the African countries. That's why we called it the Motivational Center for Africa's Transformation. That we would start, in the different countries, we would have centers.
And spread out.
And spread out the whole continent. Because one of the things in our studies was that we began to see that, the problems we faced in the rural communities were the same problems that countries were facing, in that, they had all these donor inflows, billions of dollars, but never amounted to anything, never really took the people out of poverty because, they had also created that same dependency syndrome, so we felt that this initiative, if we take it at Africa-wide, continent-wide, would be able to influence decision makers, whether it's in government, in organization, and so forth, not to really have that approach where you are always thinking somebody else owes you a living, that, the IMF are the ones who owe us a living, but that we should be able to, look at the power within, to look at it, the resources that we have been given. And mind you, Mwangala, Zambia is ranked number 13 in terms of natural endowments, in terms of rivers, the natural resources. We're number 13. Wow. So technically, we should really be living like the sheikhs of Dubai.
Of course.
In terms of wealth.
But why isn't that happening?
Absolutely. That's where MOCAT comes in. Why that is not happening is because, as they say, resources are not, they become. We have always had copper right in our own backyard. But we never really discovered that that copper is our wealth. We have always had all these rivers. Yeah. We've never discovered that those rivers are potential wealth for farming, potential wealth for tourism, potential wealth for... We need to just unlock that. It's like when we are talking before the show about, where you hail from in terms of, Rufunza there.
Yes.
Rufunza just because of the land, the trees,
the minerals there.
The minerals there. How come the people who hail from there, they are still working in Lusaka, either as security guards, others trekking to work like slaves, and they've left their wealth right where they hail from. And they say, oh, that's a God-forsaken place. Nothing happens there.
For sure.
And
so
then somebody comes from there. Of course, everything is in the mind.
So how does one remain motivated in the midst of all the challenges that we perceive to be going through as a country? I want to look at it as a perception. A perception,
absolutely. How do you remain motivated? I think you remain motivated. I always say that, right now, in terms of where we are as a nation, we need... more exposed preachers who preach a gospel that helps the people, not all these prosperity
preachers,
but people that will help that spiritual transformation of a people to begin to look at the spiritual life as a foundational.
And help people to go within.
Absolutely.
That's where the power lies.
That's where the power lies, And also, speakers like you and I, the show you are doing, that's helping quite a lot there. Because as you are interviewing me, I'm sure there are people listening, learning one or two things. So you need more of such programming that helps people to transform the way they see themselves, or the way they think. I'll give you an example. I was doing a study in northwestern Zambia, in a barrack, to looking at the supply chain, to look at, because the mine is a huge investment there, but you find that, there's a lot of money being made at the mine, but the people who own the land and who are living around the mine are so poor. And every day they are queuing up at the gate of Lumwana mine. They have even created a compound,
for them.
which actually emerged as a result. People sitting at the gate want to enter. There's a place called Manyama. It's now almost a huge compound. People came from all over wanting to come and work in the mines, but there are limited jobs in the mines. But I see opportunity there in the mines when I was doing that study is for supplies, supplies for food stuffs. For chickens alone in Lumwana, they require 6 tons every week.
Of chicken?
Of chickens alone, because they have to feed those miners. They have to feed them breakfast, lunch, and supper. They require 6 tons of chickens. But those chickens coming from the farmers around there? No. Some of them are coming as far as South Africa. How come the people there are not seeing the opportunity? You look at vegetables, you look at the meats, you look at, huge opportunity for supplies. Agriculture can literally, be a cornerstone for those mining.
And we're not looking at agriculture,
we're not looking
for the younger generation.
Absolutely. They just want to, I want to work in the mine.
Of course, I want to work in a mine or in a bank or,
Absolutely. And you know why is that? our schooling has been that, go to school, get good grades. When you get good grades, you will get a good job.
Of course. And that's it. And we've been wired like that. So how do we change that, Gilbert?
How do we change that? I think that change starts with mindset transformation. That's why I think MOCAT comes in handy, Motivational Center for Africa's Transformation, because it starts with, helping people to look at themselves differently, to look at themselves in a more positive manner. But that requires a lot of, information, because it's like the Bible talks about faith.
Of course.
He says faith comes. It comes by hearing and hearing the word of God. So positivity also should come by hearing. You have to keep talking. So you're sure, Santosh. You need to keep igniting.
You have to keep igniting. So there you have it. People have to watch the show, be ignited, and every day feel.
That's the way even advertising works. Look at Coca-Cola. I mean, they're in your face all the time.
All the time.
Before you know it, you think, I think Coke is it. Everybody wants
to. Because it's instilled subconsciously, you know. You look at something else, you're looking at Coca-Cola.
Absolutely. So it comes with what we hear. And unfortunately, for a country like the Z Republic, you know what we keep hearing is what you talk at the beginning of the show, complaining. So do you know what we increase?
Of course.
We
create our reality.
Yeah, we create that reality.
Yeah.
What we need is more voices.
People could learn that, we create our reality.
Absolutely.
By the things that we say.
So we need to keep talking about what we can do, so that those create a reality of what we want. But if at every turn you go to social media, you go to
all that, oh my God.
There's no way we can be able to go far.
So before the show ends, I'm looking at the book. I know you're an author.
Absolutely.
And this happens to be one of my favorite books.
It's also my favorite, actually. The eagle story is it's a story of the eagle that I've heard from different people, but I created mine. I created what I call my signature story. So what I've put in here, some of the things that I've put in there are things that I made up. So it's a story that I created that tells you that you can actually create something. The creative minds. So I actually so it's a hybrid of the different stories I've heard of the eagle and created one story. And for me, I created the story to really use it as a tool. So this has been my tool for transformation. Because in here, I use the analogy from the eagle and the way this eagle was brought up, which was picked from the mountain, brought up amongst the chickens, and the eagle actually became a chicken. It couldn't fly. It had all the potential to fly. It had strong wings. It had strong talons, great vision. It had everything that an eagle should be flying up where it belongs. But this eagle, in this story, became a chicken.
I want you to end it there, because I want people to follow the book and buy it. I'm definitely getting my copy. So that
I'll give it autograph.
The full story. So where can one get it? Because I think we need to start pushing people to read it. So
actually, on all the books, I've written 5 books. The Eagle Story, Managing Success, Make Money Farming, 50 Ways to Make Money in Zambia, and The Motivation. This is, I think, one of my best stories. My actual dream for this book is that out of the over 17 million people, if 1 million Zambians buy this book, read this book, internalize what is in this book, the transformation you're talking about will be a reality. So this is my dream. For me, is to sell 1 million copies to the population of Zambia so that we can bring about transformation. Because I think the transformation really begins with the mind. That book is my highly recommended. Of all the tools, people remember me more for the Eagle Story than any other seminar I've ever done. This is really has been my life work, so to say. And because I think what I bring out in there are the ingredients, the tools that we need for us to transform Zambia. And it is possible to turn our nation into a breadbasket, to turn our nation to be among the group of 20 most respected nations in terms of wealth. Because we already have, in terms of endowments, what God has given us. All we need is to begin to transform ourselves, to begin to be among the club of 20 richest nations in the world. Zambia can do it because we already have the foundation. The foundation is that, the mineral wealth, the resources, the human resource, the youthful population, the rivers, everything is there for us on the table. All we need is to transform ourselves, to begin to think in more productive ways and take our country to the club of 20 richest nations in the world.
Fantastic. Gilbert Banda, it's always a pleasure to have you on my show. I wish I could have you longer. But obviously, it would be nice to have you back again so you talk about many other books that you've written.
Absolutely. But I really think that this is a good platform you have started, because it's the only way that we can be able, so that people begin to hear more. I think I'm sick and tired that every time you open a TV channel, they're always talking about politics. It's time to talk about transformation. And even politicians, we need to preach to them more of this message of transformation. So when they're having those rallies, they should be able to actually put positivity in people, as opposed to insulting each other and, bring ourselves down. Because I think we have more positive messages. If our politicians also began to see have visions and dreams about this great nation, I think we'll be able to go far. But also we should desist from this politics of saying, oh, the ones in government, they must first fail. When they have failed, then we will come in. Because what happens that then those who now will become in opposition, they'll make sure that also they fail. In the end, the country doesn't benefit, we all lose.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure to have you on my show.
So
there you have it. I was talking to Mr. Gilbert Banda. Remember to make every day count. This has been Mwangala Chakalashi Santos. Join me for another exciting episode.